Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We've arrived to the second day of our conference focused on kin state policies. Yesterday we had great presentations. In addition to the presentations about the Hungarian diaspora policies, we had also presentations about some special diaspora engagement practices of two, let's say, paradigmatical kin state, Israel in the one hand and Turkey in the other. Both of these countries have huge co-national communities living abroad. We had heard a lot of information about policies on remigration and returns, in which Israel is a pioneer, and about extension of rights, especially as it relates to the voting right, which has a great historical background in Turkey. Today we will turn on diaspora policies in this region, in Central, Eastern and Southern Europe, with the aim of finding, regrouping and interchange some ideas about the best practices in this political area. But before starting with it, let me introduce you our guest speakers, our panelists, Egidijus Aleksandravičius and Genis from Lithuania, Molnár Balázs from the Maria Kopp Institute, and Domanicki Endre from the other organizing institute of this event, namely the Ferenc Mádl Institute. The floor is yours.
Good morning. I need to introduce myself being a historian. And in the time of the end of history, and in the time when Mr. Putin declares himself the chief historian of Russia, it's not so simple to be historian. That's the Baltic joke or smile. With no smile, I would thank the organizers, because only they know why we were accepted to this conference, where the majority of the participants are from the field of policy making, and I am from the field of the academy, Vytautas Magnus University, Institute of Lithuanian Emigration, which is much more on the side of diaspora, but not on the side of the governmental policy. Please accept me as that. Lithuania is the country full of the paradoxes, including very specific symbolism of the foreign policy. Probably everybody here heard about Lithuania declaring economical war to China a couple of months ago. Many of Lithuanian intellectuals criticized that, waiting for Russian invasion to Ukraine, you declare economical war to China, and claim it's the value-based policy. I'm ironic very much, but it's for good morning from the Baltics. My brief about Lithuanian diaspora policy covers 30 years period. It's our fresh Lithuania restituta time that the new institutions created for the diasporic policies. But again, first of the paradoxes of that short but full of events history would be that in the very beginning of our restored state, diaspora framed our policy, but policy of the government, but not the government defined policy towards diaspora. Somehow, symbolically, even the university I came from, Vytautas Magnus University, was as the fruit of diaspora academical efforts. 1989, it was restored by the efforts of the American Lithuanian community. And our institute was really initiated because we, the local academicians, felt some duties to be much more deep in the history, identity of our diaspora. Another one paradox would be that Lithuania really, as maybe many of the countries from the region, was really diasporic at least 200 years, with the biggest wave of economical emigration in the end of the 19th century, probably competing only some Galician Ukrainians. Close to Polish, but we would tell that we were the champions in percentage of the people who left, including Litvak Jewish community, which was 12% of Lithuanian population in the end of the 19th century. Imagine that. And then the flow of those economical emigres. Lithuanian state was first time restored during the second spring of nations, 1918, also with a very, very wide and strong participation of Lithuanian political diaspora, mostly from the United States. And, the narration of the people, history, collective memory, that time was very much based on that diasporic notion. The new independence, new window was opened 1990, and our diaspora, that emigration of the poets and warriors, returned back with the most symbolic political figure, President Valdas Adamkus, probably most successful president of Lithuania and the most popular political figure up to now, even if he left the office 12 years ago. And this is somehow Lithuania's identity based on that diasporic notion, but with the strange effect in our education field. For example, if you would take history textbooks always is the case of the governmental policy. How do we tell the right story of the past? And you'll not find anything serious about our diaspora in general. Sort of paradox, identity based on that, and the educational policy, which is somehow with the absence of diasporic stories in that. Having political leaders with diasporic identity, and the stories which are somehow independent, like parallel reality. Anyway, I'm returning back to the first period of Lithuanian Republic after 1990s. Couple of the first years, Lithuanian diaspora was much more influential forming that policy than the Lithuanian political strata was able to do that. And the joint interest that time was some sort in discovering or exploring new diaspora for the new state. New diaspora meant that Lithuanians during the Soviet occupation decades were deported massively to Siberia, had a lot of troubles to return back to the homeland. And when the independence was restored, then, the East, Russian Empire, that space became foreign. And the people who were living in those territories started perceiving themselves as diaspora. Lithuanians abroad. And a very, very strong impulse here was to let them define themselves, to start thinking about repatriation. And in this case, governmental interest and the Lithuanian diaspora organizations in the United States, United Kingdom, other Western democracies were very much dedicated for implementing that. Up to now, that flow of the rapid repatriation just stopped. Only some tens of thousands of Lithuanians are somewhere around a huge space of the Russian Federation now. The hope of Lithuanian political activists that time was that the people from diaspora will return back to the ancestors' land soon. It didn't happen. Very few of the Lithuanian activists joined Lithuanian political life after that. And what happened unexpectedly, that a new wave of the economical emigration just started leaving Lithuania. In the mid-90s, it was somehow in the shade, in the dark. Nobody take serious research or monitoring of growing up Lithuanian immigration, mostly to the United States, and then new European countries. Before joining European Union, nobody knew exactly the numbers, just felt that the population is somehow physically diminishing. And that was the time when the first couple of hundreds of thousands of Lithuanians left the country without any conscious policy. That time, Lithuanian government organized special department, again a little bit strange department because it combined the cases of national minorities and Lithuanian diaspora in one. Long explanation about why it happened, why it was defined like that. But it was special department on the rights of ministry, separate ministry, which joined the concerns of national minorities after the Soviet period and Lithuanian diaspora. But at that time they had no idea about that new wave which approached. And after joining European Union, the statistics, the numbers became much more clear, and then it was like a shock. Because during that period, from late 90s up to, say, 2010 or 12, we could feel that almost 600,000 or even 700,000 of Lithuanians from 3.5 million population in the 90s just left Lithuania. Enormous numbers. Again, we could say that we were the champions. We could compete the Poles, not in absolute numbers, but in percentage. And yes, it was a time with no serious explanation. Lithuania was still waiting of the diaspora activists returning back to the promised land of the ancestors, at the same time meeting in the airports those new waves getting out of the country. And that was a challenge. Lithuanian government then started organizing different information centers, especially in the new countries of Lithuanian emigration. Means that the United States had a very, very dense organization network. World Lithuanian Community, which was organized in the year 1949, World Lithuanian Community, which was for the diaspora, but the nation was stateless then. And now the new challenge, new wave of emigres just flooded all the centers of Lithuanian diaspora. With the time, especially after joining European Union, maybe the flow to the United States just stopped, but then London, United Kingdom, Ireland, Scandinavian countries, Spain, a little bit Germany. That was the target countries for the emigres. It was spontaneous. It was the stream which was unmanageable. Sometimes provided the facts or questions or puzzles. How much can we manage unmanageable? And the state efforts were not very strong. Resources were not very big. Cooperation between academical or expertise censures and the government was very weak again. Still, we can say that the policy is not very much based on the research. Again, the researchers, like our institute, with some 60 volumes of books published during 25 years, but only 2 dissertations which concerned the policy. Yes. Everything concentrated on the history, mentality, associational life, but not straight and practical research which could provide some insinuations for the policy. This is the fact, unfortunately. Our institute is much more involved in that past and not so practical in the consequence. Thick books, not often useful for the practical policy making. And I count my minutes, and they are so fast that my task here to express one interesting and unanswered topic. When Global Lithuania, in my title, could be with quotation signs too, because from the year 2008, Lithuania created the national program they called Global Lithuania. It's like a political platform. The parties agreed on that, and that time the implementation of the program of the Global Lithuania was given for Foreign Office, the function to coordinate 9 other ministries and departments and concentrate all attention to the diaspora case. But as I told, some sort of paradox. Ministry of Education is this responsible for the education of the diaspora, but forgetting about education of the Lithuania towards diaspora. Like push the textbooks where diaspora is absent. And then give diaspora weekend schools or Lithuanistic schools some elementary information and help to teach Lithuanian language at least. Nothing more. For me, it's a little bit small impact. Coordination with the good intention, but with very, very little of effect or fruits. Ministry of Foreign Affairs itself is responsible for relations with diaspora organizations. But in my understanding, this is sort of tricky. Lithuanian side, responsibility lays 100% of the bureaucracy on the state apparatus, some special sector of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. When diaspora is a global NGO, World Lithuanian Community is like the network organization. Tens of all the very different representing different generations of Lithuanians abroad. From organizations with a 120-year long history, like the Knights of Lithuania in the United States. 3 generations speaking English, being as hot Lithuanian patriots as possible. In Lithuanian governmental screen of identification, they are not Lithuanians at all. Because more and more, the governmental interest was to touch only new wave of our emigres who are the citizen of Lithuania and can participate in Lithuanian political life. Means that that diasporic policy left aside old Lithuanian diaspora. Those in South America, in Australia, sometimes even forgetting about South American Lithuanian community. Or South African, which is just disappeared even from memory, leaving some memories of Litva community, Lithuanian Jewish community in South Africa, but forgetting about Lithuania in general. It's, again, dissatisfaction of those political steps. Yes, Lithuania got one place, as you saw yesterday in one of the presentations, one place in 140 places Lithuanian parliament. Separate district for the elections. And some governmental structures like the school, boarding school in Vilnius for repatriates, attracting, like in the other countries, young people to come to Lithuania for some studies, refreshing Lithuanian identity. But according to me, it's very, very little. And when I say that our policy, which is 100% governmental action, with no civil society involved, and the other side of the border, well-organized World Lithuanian Community as the network of those organizations. As the example, historical example, what I mean saying that, would be the fact of the first and only World Lithuanian Congress, which was held in Kaunas 1935. Only one, which was successfully organized by the association of, it was the association of Lithuanian Association for Support of the Lithuanians Abroad. That was NGO. Because diaspora was not always very pleasant towards Lithuanian political order. Our authoritarian president, Antanas Smetona, was really hated by diasporic groups, not saying about the communists in the United States, but including Catholic organizations. But the most exemplary success of creating that global Lithuania was when Lithuanian side was represented by NGO, supported by the government. And the other side was civil society elsewhere in the world. And that created the best bridge for the future. That Congress decided about creating the World Lithuanian Union, which unfortunately was not implemented because Soviet occupation, so fresh for us anyway. And basing on those achievements, on those documents, later on in the DP camp in Germany was established this World Lithuanian Community, which is still acting. From this point, I end and say that it is the open corridor with the lights in the end of that. We still have unexplored chances, unexplored civil energy to reach the purposes of global Lithuania. To bridge not only the civic sector and governmental sector, but to bridge much more Lithuanian local society with so big diversity of the Lithuanians abroad, speaking different languages, sometimes having different colors of faces, not only so red like mine, but sometimes darker, somewhere in Southern America. And in the end, I will finish again with some Baltic irony I started with. Now, listening our authorities, sometimes those new PR officers, you could feel that the biggest Lithuanian concern is to find Litvaks around the world. Litvak is the also a bit ironic name given to Lithuanian Jew in the mid-19th century. And Lithuania, the country of the Holocaust, with some unfinished tasks of our memory, with some untold stories, with some questions and accounts. officials practicing this political decent rhetorics, they would always say, think Bob Dylan is of the Lithuanian root. And it repeats and repeats and repeats, putting the monuments for Salinger somewhere in the village of Lithuania, because that was Lithuanian world, with our Jews, with our Germans, with our Poles, and with our Tatars, and with our Russians. And this is, you know, a little bit of, example when the PR, who already ate media, now sometimes eats policies. And that's the end of the story. Thank you.